Hey everybody, I have a video here for you tonight. Now, a lot of my videos lately have been on ancient American history, so I thought this was a perfect time to do a video on Leif Erikson, and I know many of you have heard of him, but I just want to fly you into the city where I spent the first few years of my life, Duluth, Minnesota, right on the tip of Lake Superior here. And when I was about 3, my family moved to the Minneapolis area, but we kept on coming back up to Duluth because my grandparents lived here, and I ended up going to school up here in Duluth. But one place that we always visited here was this, called Leif Erikson Park. And as a 8-9-year-old, I remember visiting this park with my grandparents and seeing the statue here on the shore of Lake Superior. And I remember reading, it said, Leif Erikson, Discoverer of America, 1000 AD. And this was in direct conflict to what I was being told in school, that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. And I remember my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Schmidt, talking about Christopher Columbus discovering America, and me informing her a little later in the day that she was wrong, and having a brief discussion with her. And I just remember the confusion about this, so I wanted to look into Leif Erikson, and did he actually discover America in 1000 AD? And this is a story that I was semi-familiar with, but I just wanted to read a little more, and what I found I thought was pretty cool. So I just thought I would share and talk a little bit about Leif Erikson and his discovery of America in 1000 AD. But before I zoom out of Leif Erikson Park here, I just wondering on Google Earth through these circular garden structures, that these aren't supposed to resemble Viking ruins. This is a Viking ruin from Denmark. They are always in the form of these circles. That I just couldn't help but notice that on Google Earth. Maybe that is why they were built this way. But the story of Leif Erikson really starts with his father, Eric the Red, and that's how people got their name back then. Eric the Red's son was named Erikson, Leif Erikson. That is just how they did things back then, and that's how they named people. But the story really begins over in Norway in the Viking Era, and that is between 800 and 1100 AD roughly. But this is the area the Vikings came out of, Norway, Denmark, Sweden area. And Eric the Red was kind of a bad dude. He got thrown out of Norway. The Vikings were marauders and pillagers. I don't think that's any great secret. But Eric the Red got banished from Norway, and he was a great sailor. So what did he do? He took some ships and he went over to Iceland and settled in Iceland. And before, this is probably where Leif Erikson was born, in Iceland. But not before too long, he got thrown out of Iceland also. But he was a pretty great explorer. He was a great sailor. So he wanted to keep on going west, and he headed to Greenland. So I'm going to fly you into Greenland here, and crossing the Atlantic back in the day was basically just hopscotching from Scandinavia to Iceland and over to Greenland. But this is one area that Eric the Red founded and settled, and I believe had somebody important in his crew set up shop and live here. This is famous for an old church that was built here, and here you get a look at the ruins of that church. But these have been pretty much confirmed to be Viking ruins of Eric the Red's expedition. And there is one other place I want to lead you into here. But I'm going to zoom you into the place where Eric the Red actually called home here. And this is called Brattahlid. And this is what is here today, a farm. But these are ruins of the time from Eric the Red. But here is a better look at some other ruins here at Brattahlid in Greenland, the classic Viking circle. We have some things that were reconstructed here, but this is what it was supposedly looked like back in the day. But this is where Eric the Red settled, in a beautiful area of Greenland. Temperatures were much warmer back then, in this area, and I'm going to show you a little chart showing that in a second, but this would have offered some shelter from storms and such. It would have been a beautiful harbor to live in. Eric the Red lived here. This is where Leif Erikson, his heritage came from. His father was a great explorer, a great seaman. He continued that legacy from some of Eric the Red's buddies and fellow marauders. He learned of a land to the west, an unknown land, and he thought he would set sail for that. But first I want to show you the temperature chart that says that it was a lot warmer back then, about 1,000 years ago. And here you see a Greenland ice core temperature chart over the last 10,000 years. At the very right here is our current spike in temperature, what is depicted at least up until about 10 years ago. That is what this little spike at the very far right is. And this large spike here is the temperature rise that happened about 1,000 years ago. It's called the medieval warming period. And, you know, there wasn't any pollution concerns back then, so what exactly caused this huge rise in temperature 1,000 years ago makes our little puny rise today look kind of insignificant. But, you know, pollution is a major concern, but this chart shows that pollution is not the major concern, or shouldn't be the major concern of ours as far as climate and temperature change. There are other factors involved, and mainly, I believe, things hitting the Earth from outer space, comets, meteors, and things that cause these drastic cataclysmic changes in temperatures. So, with that said, let me go back to Google Earth here. But Leif Erikson wanted to go further west and do some exploring in the great tradition of his father. And he set sail about 1,000 years ago. And he set down in northeastern Canada, Newfoundland, what is known as Leonsauk Meadows, historic national site. And this really, two and two were put together, and people realized these were Viking ruins about 50 years ago, and I will leave a link for that exploration. But here are the Viking ruins of Leif Erikson at Leonsauk Meadows on the very tip of Newfoundland, and I'm going to leave a couple links for that below, and I'm going to do some reading. But this would have made sense. You hopscotched your way across the northern Atlantic. You came into this new area, and what would you want to do? You would want to set up a little harbor for your ships, give it some shelter from the storms. That's exactly what this peninsula provided, and this is where the ruins of Leif Erikson from 1,000 years ago, about 500 years before Columbus. This is where he sat down at Leonsauk Meadows in Newfoundland, and these are the ruins, and I'm just going to do a little reading. This is the Windows to World History, and I will leave this link below, but it says Leif Erikson and Leonsauk Meadows. It says, two of the undisputed facts in the story of Leif Erikson is that the Vikings were consummate shipbuilders and sailors, and Leif Erikson was born into an impressive maritime tradition. When Europeans of his time glimpsed a square sail and dragon-head prow on the horizon, they fled or waited in terror for the impending Viking raid. It says Viking age lasting from 800 to 1100 AD featured the sleek, speedy Viking launch ship or drekker, an unsurpassed technological advantage which allowed them to dominate the world of medieval warfare, trade, and politics. It says Leif Erikson visited America 500 years before Columbus. It says over his lifetime, Leif Erikson made full and effective use of Viking ship technology. Another undisputed fact about Leif Erikson is that he was an explorer from Iceland and one of the first European visitors to North America when he and his men pulled their Viking ships up on its beaches 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Two Icelandic sagas, commonly called the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, relate the story of Leif's life and place of his birth in 971 and his death in 1015, although other biographies' cities date differently. It is certain that Leif was the second son of Eric the Red, who was exiled from Iceland and established the first European settlement in Greenland. According to the sagas, Leif moved to Greenland with his parents in 986, and in the same year, another gentleman, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name, followed Eric the Red to Greenland. The sagas imply that this dude was not a good navigator, but he missed Greenland and sailed to the southwest until he sighted the Labrador and Newfoundland coasts. 15 years old at the time, Leif avidly listened to this guy's tales of his adventures, which focused on trade, because this guy craved trade more than discovering new lands. Leif rebelled under his father's patriarchal rule, and when he became of age, he made up his mind to visit the southernmost tip of that land that was described by this fellow in his stories. And that is where he got his inspiration and his courage. And it says the sagas say that Leif's voyage and discoveries were not accidents, and they reveal that some historians don't realize how skilled the Vikings were at navigation. Leif set sail in 995, passed Markland in Labrador, and reached Newfoundland. Here the sagas say his thirsty crew licked dew from the grass. The men decided to winter here because they noticed that the days were longer than those at home. And this is where they set up camp at Leonce Meadows in Newfoundland. And the story is that there was iron smelting done here, and some nails were found, the kind that they use on boat repair. So this was kind of a camp that was set up, and maybe further explorations were done out of this site on the very tip of Newfoundland. Possibly around this side of the island, you would have gone on to maybe the coast of Maine or Halifax. And if you went the other route, the other way, you would have gone down the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and you would have gone down into the Great Lakes. And I don't think maybe an exploration that maybe made it all the way to Duluth, Minnesota up here, I don't think that is totally out of the realm of possibility. In fact, let me see if I can get the right picture. In 1927, an exact replica of Leif Erikson's ship was built. In 1927, it was sailed from Norway all the way into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, all the way through the Great Lakes, and this is a picture of that ship arriving in Duluth, Minnesota in 1927. Now, it would have been a little bit easier to navigate all the way to Duluth, Minnesota in 1927, but still, 1927, about 100 years ago, that is still a long time ago, and some of the current technological advantages certainly were not around in 1927, so that proves that a ship like that definitely could have made it as far as Duluth, Minnesota. Did they make it as far as Duluth, Minnesota? I think that is still a mystery. I think the Norwegians that settled in Minnesota and were familiar with the tales of Eric the Red and Leif Erikson put up these statues in kind of just recognizing their homeland's tradition and stories. So as far as Leif Erikson really making it to Duluth, Minnesota, I think that is a bit of a mystery, but he definitely set foot in North America about 500 years before Columbus. We have evidence of this coming from Newfoundland, up at Leonce Meadows, this site that matches what Leif Erikson wrote about in the sagas. And this is that area, once again, of Newfoundland that Leif Erikson set down, and this is no fairy tale that the standard model of history is teaching. This is actually what happened about 1,000 years ago, and this is the area where Leif Erikson set down in North America about 500 years before Columbus. Further explorations were definitely possible. Did they happen? Well, I guess that is still a great mystery. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice night.